The man who promised to stop the Ukraine-Russian war on day one of taking power has instead, on day 42, decided to stop all further US military aid to Ukraine. The war, of course, continues to drag on. President Trump said his arms embargo will only be lifted when he's ascertained that President Zelensky is serious about peace. Exactly what he has to do to convince Trump isn't clear, but I think we can be sure Trump will want it to involve a lot of groveling and kissing of the ring. Either that, implies the White House, or Zelensky should make way for a Ukrainian leader who is prepared to bend the knee. What happens next is anybody's guess. It always is in Trump world. But amid the chaos and confusion, it's important not to lose sight of some pretty fundamental facts. First, this is the worst crisis in the long and successful history of NATO and the Atlantic Alliance. It might not survive. A pact which has kept us safe and secure for as long as most of us can remember is crumbling for no good reason other than the capricious whims of a man in the Oval Office. Second, it's being demolished on a litany of falsehoods. Trump says America has given Ukraine $350 billion in military, financial, humanitarian aid, with nothing to show for it. Wrong. America has spent $120 billion, and the dividend has been to thwart Russia from taking all of Ukraine, then going on to threaten the rest of Eastern Europe, consisting of America's NATO allies. Trump says America has given Ukraine a lot more than Europe. Wrong. European aid combined totals $138 billion, almost $20 billion more than the US. Trump claims European aid is mainly in loans and it will be repaid one day, whereas American aid is in grants. Wrong. The bulk of European aid, like American aid, is in grants. Thus is NATO in danger of being dismantled on a tissue of lies. But it gets worse. It's increasingly hard to avoid the conclusion that Trump is a better friend of Russia than he is of NATO or Ukraine. That when it comes to a choice, Russia or NATO, Trump chooses Russia. It's hard to credit that it can be so. Yet Trump is cutting off arms to Ukraine while Russia's war machine continues unhindered, and Iran, North Korea, and China ramp up their support. The Trump administration is even preparing plans to drop sanctions on Russia before a peace deal is struck, adding to the concessions Trump has already indicated he'll make to the Kremlin in advance of any talks. So much for his art of the deal. As Trump tries to discombobulate us with all manner of stuff and nonsense, it's worth holding on to some other fundamentals. There is an invader, Russia, and a victim, Ukraine. There is a democracy, Ukraine, and a dictatorship, Russia. There is a country that wants to be a European democracy and a Western market economy, Ukraine, and another that hates democracy, freedom, and everything else the West stands for, Russia. That we have a US president who sides with the invader and penalizes the victim is proof that our world has turned upside down. The US arms embargo will not undermine Ukraine's war effort immediately, but it will take its toll as we head into the summer. Europe must do all it can to fill the gaps, as it's already starting to do. But it cannot replace everything America is now denying. Of course, Trump may yet pull back from the brink. He wants that mineral rights deal with Ukraine. Zelensky may be prepared to abase himself. Things could be back on track, sort of, but not really. For what lunacy might Trump get up to next in pursuit of his own self-interest and ego? What hope of the Atlantic Alliance when its head is a better friend of Russia than of Europe? Whatever happens, Europe must prepare for a future without America. It was already starting to realize that before Trump pulled the rug from under Ukraine. It can now be in no doubt and must rearm accordingly.
Poland's prime minister has confirmed that the suspension of US military aid has come into force immediately. Donald Tusk said that the information from a logistics hub in the south of the country backed up reports that US aid for Kyiv has been paused. We've been talking about this throughout the show, Alistair, but was it inevitable this was going to happen, and pretty soon after those scenes in the White House last week?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the tools that Donald Trump has in his armory, if you like, with Ukraine diplomacy. There's been an almighty falling out. Donald Trump had hoped that Vladimir Zelensky would go to the White House last week, sign the deal, and they'd be happy, and the Americans would be getting, or starting to think about the money they were going to make from the minerals deal. Obviously, that didn't happen. Donald Trump is still very keen on that deal. He sees the economic benefits, and so I think this is another sort of stick, if you like, to bring the Ukrainians to heel. Ukraine absolutely relies on US aid. Donald Trump talks about $350 billion that America provides. That's way more than they've actually sent over. But even so, the weapon systems, the warplanes, the kit, the tools that America sent is absolutely vital to Ukraine's performance on the battlefield.
I mean, and this is being done presumably as I guess as a threat. We shouldn't think of this as being a new permanent state of affairs. This is something he's done because he wants it to cause a particular result, right?
Exactly. He's trying to squeeze the Ukrainians. The Americans are at pains to say that this is a freeze or a pause. It's not a permanent state of being. The weapons are not necessarily going to go to Ukraine, but the Americans are also very keen that this minerals deal gets done, and Vladimir Zelensky says he's sorry. I mean, how he's going to do that, but apologises for what happened in the White House last week and get the economic deal back on track. At which point, then they're likely to get the weapons.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, J.D. Vance has been speaking, and he's tried to clarify his comments about a random country that hasn't fought a war in the last 40 years, saying that he didn't mean the UK. Where do we think he did mean?
Well, I mean, I think it's only the UK and France that have so far put their hands up and said that they would definitely be prepared to send peacekeepers to Ukraine to enforce any ceasefire. So I think he was either talking about the Ukraine or France or both. So it's not altogether clear what he was talking about. I think, as often with JD Vance, there's a sort of there are comments, and then there's a bit of a winding back after once the headline has been once the headline's been grabbed. But it's his point is one that I think is central to US strategy, which is, this is an American operation. The Europeans will do what the Americans want, and even the Europeans in this case are going to find it difficult to get the concessions from America that they're looking for, the military backstop, the air support if UK and French troops go and act as peacekeepers.
Well, look, that's, of course, the big story here in the UK. Presumably over there, the biggest story is tariffs, because Trump's tariffs on Canada and Mexico have come into effect after a deadline to strike a deal passed without an agreement. I mean, how much opposition is there to this? Are people very, very concerned, or is there just sort of great support for the president and the White House and what they're doing?
It depends where you stand. If you're a Republican Trump supporter or a member of the administration, you're very much in favour. Lots of cabinet ministers were on the airwaves yesterday supporting this move and saying how it was good for America, how it would be good for the American economy. A lot of Democrats, a lot of opponents, and a lot of polls also say that people don't necessarily believe that. Economists were saying yesterday that this is inflationary. Warren Buffett was out saying the tooth fairy doesn't charge tariffs on the tooths. The tooth fairy collects, sort of slightly belittling Donald Trump's approach. But it's a huge row, and I think that farmers are concerned, especially with the action that China's taken on agricultural goods. People, car plant workers, many of whom went out to vote for Donald Trump in the election, are concerned because of the extra cost on cars the American consumer in the short term. So it's central to Donald Trump's economic strategy. He will have to hope that inflation doesn't spike, that consumer prices don't rise, and that it's seen as a good thing. A lot of economists doubt that will happen.
I mean, on this one, Alistair, should we see this as being, again, a bargaining tool that he's hoping some effect will happen that means he can then step back? Or is this actually what he wants to do? Because if it is a bargaining tool, I must say I'm unclear as to what bargain he wants to strike.
Well, he spoke yesterday at the White House about wanting a lot of, say, car manufacturers to move their plants from Mexico and Canada, where it might be cheaper to employ people to assemble these cars, into the US. And so, therefore, he's saying to some of these car makers, look, you won't have to pay tariffs if these vehicles are built in America. But of course, slightly more complicated than that. Parts for cars often cross the border several times before being put into a vehicle, and they'd be charged that tariff each time. Agricultural products would need to be changed. There's often a time lag between the tariff starting and companies adapting to them. So it might be a bargaining chip, but it could be quite a long run thing. And in that time, I think a lot of economists think that American consumers might suffer.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, a bit of breaking news for you. We're learning that Keir Starmer spoke to Donald Trump on Monday night. Downing Street has just said that. It's not clear whether the call was before or after the president paused military aid to Ukraine, but I'm sure we'll find that out. Number 10 wouldn't comment directly on the pause, said it wouldn't comment directly on the pause without seeing details of the announcement, and didn't say whether Secure had been given any guidance on that from the US before the move or not. We'll bring you more on that when we have it. Alistair, Donald Trump's going to deliver his first major speech since being sworn into office in January to Congress tonight. It looks a lot like a State of the Union address, although it won't technically be one. Why won't it?
Because he's only been in office about 6 weeks. So the State of the Union is the president reporting back to Congress on his previous 12 months. Of course, Donald Trump is only January when he came back into office. But for all intents and purposes, that's what it is. I think we're going to get Donald Trump lauding some of his early achievements, his policies, his break with the Biden regime. The Biden administration. The other thing I think to look for as well is any update on the minerals deal. He was asked yesterday whether the minerals deal with Ukraine was dead, and he was at pains to say it wasn't. I think there'll be quite a lot of frantic diplomatic back and forth during today to try and get the Ukrainians on board, to try and get the Ukrainians to agree. And so that Donald Trump can announce that tonight. That's certainly, I think, something he wants to do.
I mean, why is he giving this speech? Is it a sort of a traditional thing to do, or is he just doing it because he wants to?
It happens every year. So the State of the Union is every year, but of course, Donald Trump's only been in office a few weeks, so it's his address to a joint session of Congress. Effectively the same thing, but he hasn't got 12 months to report on. More like about 6 weeks.
Right. Okay. So it's normal practice. Look, the response is going to be from the Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin. What do we know about her? What kind of Democrat is she?
Well, she's a very interesting choice because she's only been in the Senate for a few weeks. Only was sworn in January. She's also moderate from Michigan. Michigan, a state that Donald Trump won in November last year, one that Kamala Harris thought she had a good chance of winning and will be crucial in 2028 as well. She's a moderate. She's railed against culture wars, been very supportive of Israel in the Middle East. So I think the selection of her demonstrates, firstly, that the Democrats want a fresh start. They want fresh blood, and they want the American people to see some of their up-and-coming stars. But also, perhaps messages from the Democrats on culture war, on social issues, will be replaced a little bit by perhaps some harder politics, something that more on Donald Trump's traditional battlegrounds.
I mean, are the Democrats putting up a sort of united opposition at the moment, or are they in some disarray?
I think it would be polite to say that the Democrats are in some disarray. I think it's very difficult at the moment to work out what the Democratic Party stands for. You've only got to look at a couple of people this week who've put their head above the parapet, refusing to rule out a run in 2028. Andrew Cuomo, who is a disgraced former governor of New York, he is running to be New York mayor and has said he wants to use that as a springboard to the White House. And Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who of course ran with Kamala Harris last year, has also said that should the opportunity arise, he'd consider a presidential run in 2028. I think the chances of Americans electing either of those men at the moment is pretty close to zero, but they're being given the oxygen to sort of flex their muscles. The party, I think, needs some new leadership. It needs to identify who its next generation of leaders are, and that might start tonight with as you say, the response to Donald Trump's speech in Congress.